So there's no major reason why I've gone live now. I've announced the breath work for next week, and Innerview's 2 weeks out, so I just thought I'm going to go live and see what happens and see where we go with it. I also haven't done a live for ages, so I thought I'd talk about a couple of things, but mainly because the breath work and because I had a spare 5 minutes and I feel like I should get on when I can. So, because I see it's filling up in here now as I speak. If you have any burning questions or anything that you want me to talk about, then bring it up. And while I see if any of that stuff comes in, any questions do come in and start me off down one of my rabbit hole tangents, I'll tell you quickly. The breathwork is next week, Tuesday, the 30th of August. It's going to be at 7:30 UK time. If you sign up, obviously you'll get access to the recording as well. And so, yeah, come and sign up. If you've never done it before, I'll tell you all how to do it. Yeah, you can come and join and try it. And obviously, people that have done it before, you know that you can return and do it again. And this will be the last one before Innerview starts, and Innerview starts on the 6th of September, Monday the 6th of September. And for anybody that doesn't know what that is, the questions are coming, good. Anybody that doesn't know what Innerview is, it's a 6-week program. Basically, there's loads of like content that you can go and access online. You get access to more stuff each week over the 6 weeks, and then we do a live session each week. And in the live session, that's where we kind of bring all the work together. We do like a live breathwork session at the end of it with a big visualization, and the process essentially will take you on a journey to build up your adult self, who you are now, your core self, who you are now, so that you feel safe enough to go and get your inner child and create a loving relationship with them. I really, really believe in it, and if you want to join, then join. So let me answer some of these questions. I've got to go back already, look. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? In your opinion, does childhood trauma lead to skewed adult relationships? In short, yes, if what we mean by skewed adult relationships is like difficulty within those relationships, I would say the answer is yes. In fact, look, trauma plays out in our relationships. And so I think that's why this whole ultra independence became quite a big thing at one point, because one way to avoid having to deal with your trauma or having to work through it or avoid it showing up in your life is to become ultra independent, right? I don't need anybody, right? And then because trauma essentially mostly is a core wound in the ways in which I love myself and my ability to feel loved and be loving towards somebody else. So it always plays up in our relationships. And so, like, people often say to me, you know, you're very healed, or, you know, you're very far along. I hope to get to where I'm like, listen, I might be good at talking on social media. I might be good at making videos and talking on stage. But listen, put me in my relationships where I'm seeking attachment from people, and I am, you've used the word skewed. That don't even cut it for what I am. Yeah. So I'm always very honest about that. Right. And I think that's important. And that's why as well, vulnerability online is courageous. It's difficult. It takes a lot to do, but it's nothing compared to being vulnerable in the relationships in which I seek. And so really, to bring it back to the question, does trauma lead to skewed adult relationships? The answer is that trauma plays out in our relationships because the wounding happens in our loving relationships. The wounding happens in normally in the people that were supposed to keep us safe, inability or lack of desire or whatever it was that drove them to not be able to be with us and help us comprehend our difficult experiences. And so then when we try to love or be loved, then it shows up there. Next question. Would love you to come to our breath and ice bath event at the Nest. I'd love to come. Message me about it and I will come. drop me a DM, message me about it, and I promise I will remember. How long have you been working through trauma? I'm curious as I'm starting my journey. I have actively been working on my healing journey actively now for, it would have been 10 years in May. So I actively started working on my healing journey when I stopped drinking. I stopped drinking, my first sober day was May the 14th, 2012. So I've been actively working on it there. The reason I say actively working on it is because for this person that's asking, what I would say to you is that don't allow yourself to believe that you've just started, all right? You got to where you are now because you've been working through it in your own way. Now, that might have looked like doing things that didn't serve you. That might have looked like doing things that harmed you or harmed people around you, but it got you to here, right? And you were doing your best and you were trying to work your way through it. The same as when I started using alcohol and drugs when I was 12 or 13 years old, I was in some ways beginning my healing journey. I was starting to look for the answer. I was starting to look for something to deal with the ways that I felt. Now, alcohol, for example, in my instance, worked in the beginning, all right, until it became a problem. And that attempt at a solution then became a problem within itself. However, the initial act of me obsessively using alcohol in the way that I did stemmed from an inability to be with myself, and so a desire to find a way to be able to navigate that. All right, so don't discredit yourself in that way. I know that's not what you meant to do, but have more compassion. You got to where you are, you've become who you are, and the healing process will just be about reflection and working out the things that maybe that serve you still in a healthy or more positive way, and having compassion for the things that don't, and then maybe trying to work towards stopping or removing them, or at least finding compassion for yourself when you do them. Because listen, I've been at it 10 years and I'm still doing things that don't actively always serve me. Yeah? Do not get caught up in this idea that healing is about getting to somewhere and being a better person, because it ain't, right? Healing is about loving every part of yourself in its entirety and understanding that all of those parts of you exist because they love you enough to help you survive. All right, so to bring it back just quickly to the question, how long have you been working for it? Actively just over 10 years, but we're all on that journey, wherever you are, whether you're awake to it or not. Good man, coach, I need to come back to you, don't I, for a message. I promise I will do that. Will you give a shout out to the Blobby Club? There's your shout out. I don't know, tell me what the Blobby Club is and then I'll shout it out probably. Hey Josh, just been reading about epigenetics and trauma, feels a bit out there to me. Do you think we can inherit our parents' trauma in our DNA? I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so what I can give is the way that it makes me feel when we talk about that. I think in our quest to try and make sense of who we are and the ways that we experience the world, we over-rationalize things, and we reduce human beings to robots. So even like when we talk about things like dopamine hits and stuff like that, now I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about them, but it misses out all the nuance of what it is to be a human being, right? Okay, so we release certain chemicals when certain things happen, and maybe it's in our DNA and all that, but it's deeper than that. For me, it's way deeper than that. And I don't like to try and make sense of who I am and the way that I experience the world through too overly rationalistic ideals, because I think it's deeper than that. And I think what happens is science in and of itself doesn't do it any justice, because we always think of it, what science always does is it takes us to it whittles the human experience down like we're a computer or an engine or a robot, and I don't think that's true. I think what separates us from every other being on the planet is this consciousness, right? And so without sounding too far out there, and to bring it back to the question, do you think you can inherit your parents' trauma in our DNA? Probably, maybe, but what difference ultimately does it make? I don't know. Maybe it will lead to some big differences. But the difference I certainly wouldn't want to find myself doing is trying to alter my DNA, right? Because that's the next place that you go to. So I don't know. Who knows? That's my ramblings on the question, though. Hello. Hi, straight to the point. Have been diagnosed with ADD as an adult. Off the cuff, the best resource for adult ADD apart from therapy. Don't know. There's probably people in here. That might be able to answer that question for you. I'm not going to try and answer it without knowing. All right. So I don't want to give you a fake answer. Let's look for more. Are you a psychotherapist? No, I'm not. I'm just a coach and somebody who reflects on my experiences. Can you touch on boundaries? Learning them fast in recovery. Sometimes can't identify whether it's me being sensitive or poor boundary settings. Well, look, to the second point, what I would say is that don't make it either or, right? It's probably in nearly every instance both, right? Being sensitive is not a bad thing. It just means that we need to recognize that we're sensitive and then maybe deal with things slightly differently to people who aren't sensitive. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? The world, by the way, is ever changing, right? And so I believe we might move into a world where our level of sensitivity becomes the norm. It certainly feels like sensitivity is an ever increasing thing. But let me give you an example of what I mean by that. If you take something like dyslexia, right? One of the things with something like dyslexia is that people scan read rather than fully reading the word, right? Now, we might say in times gone by that that's a bad thing, right? You need to be able to fully read the words, because if you want to read a book, right, you need to be able to fully read the words, and scan reading's not useful. But in today's world, fast-paced world that we live in, maybe it's better to be able to scan read a book because reading a whole book now is too time laboring when you can consume content in different ways, right? So it kind of changes and you start to say, well, I wish I could scan read a book, right? So there's positive and negatives in that, and we're always changing. So sensitivity is my superpower, right? When nurtured properly. I've veered away from the question completely, haven't I? Is it you being sensitive or poor boundary settings? Look, those kind of things for me are just an ever moving, evolving experience that ultimately all I need to do and what I should be looking to do is just be curious about them, right? It's to try and navigate them and understand and be able to reflect back on them and try and do what I can, what's best in the moment. And again, this brings it back to what we said earlier about relationships. I'm quite good at laying boundaries now with people that I don't know, but put me in personal relationships and people that I really care about, and I really struggle with boundaries again, right? Because now I'm seeking somebody's love, and then it becomes difficult, right? And actually, that's less about my kind of sensitivity and more about my wounding, right? And my need to be loved, particularly by the people that I want to love me, right? That I'm seeking attachment from. So then boundaries become much harder, and what I do is I trick and deceive myself and say this isn't a lack of boundaries, this is just me being really, really loving, when actually it's not that, it's a lack of boundaries, right? So like most things, right, it's ultimately like try and do the best you can, but just be aware, and you'll learn, and you spend time noticing, and you'll pick it up, and you'll make changes as a result, right? Let's go. Oh yes, Pete is a very good person for the ADHD stuff, for that previous question that was earlier. I'm scrolling down, and he's offered you a DM there as well, which is good. DM him; he knows his stuff on that thing. Good. People are pointing you in that direction. Is it possible to forget parts of your life and feel as though something is missing? Yes, absolutely. So large parts of my childhood I don't remember. Okay, very, very large parts. I don't really remember senior school, not properly. I can sense feelings and memories in that, but I really can't recall much of it. Certainly before that, I don't recall much of it. A lot of the ways that I've made sense of my childhood, by the way, is to hypothesize, and that's okay to do that, right? And that's why I say to people, I never tell my story as a clear set thing. I always explore my story, because my story evolves. My perception of my life changes, as does my recall memory. Because if you're filling in the blanks all of the time, well then you might fill them in wrong, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't hypothesize and our truth can't change. And that's been really, really important to me. And what I mean by hypothesize is recognize my level of sensitivity today, for example, and then picture what it might have been like for the 2-year-old me. And I can do this reflecting, right? I can picture the 2-year-old me, particularly as I develop a relationship with my inner child, and I can hypothesize, my dad was like this, how would I have felt and what impacts would that have had on me? And that again helps me to make sense of who I am and the ways that I interact with the world. For me, the healing journey is about making sense of my experience, particularly my pain. That's really, really important. I believe a lot of the sort of quote unquote mental health conversation at the moment dehumanizes us as people, and stops us making sense of our pain. It just says the mental health conversation, not all of it, but some of it to a degree at the moment, just says you have every chance in this world, the same as everybody else. And so if you haven't made it, it must lie within you. The problem must be within you. And I don't think that's true. That misses out the complexities of life, of personal relationships, with the ways that we've experienced the world and the ways that it's unraveled and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so making sense of my pain and making sense of my struggle in the context of the ways that I've experienced the life has been some of the most important healing work I've done. All right, so yes, I would say it's possible to forget parts of your life. I've certainly forgot mine. I do this, I tell everyone I don't need them because they are incapable of handling, coping and supporting my traumas. You can't just shut out your traumas because few are actually equipped to handle them. Well, that's another thing, right? We live in a world that says to everybody, you should talk, you should talk, you should talk, right? But then we don't let people talk. Let me give you an example, right? Let me give you an example of this, right? Everybody says you should talk about it. Let's normalize the conversation. People should be able to talk about their experiences. And then people will do it online and somebody will comment and say, you should have put a trigger warning on that. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. I'm not saying we shouldn't do trigger warnings, but if this is my experience and you want me to talk about it, then what? Then what do we do, right? And so that's like a clear time when that happens, because people aren't ready to hear their experiences, right? And I question that. If it's somebody's experience, they should be allowed their experience, right? And they should be free to talk about it. Now, there is definitely something to be said about us all acknowledging the spaces we're in and who we're speaking to and the things that we're saying. But I think it's quite shaming to tell people that their story should come with a trigger warning. I think it's quite shaming. Maybe we just change the language and we say, I'm about to talk about suicide, or I'm about to talk about depression. Yeah. But there's a lot to be said for people not being ready to hear our experiences. All right. So opening up to the right people, and there's not many of them about, right? So that's part of the problem. So again, if we grow up in a society, in a world where there's not many people that have enough time or space to be able to listen to our experiences, right? Well, then it makes sense that we keep them all in. That's not a problem within you. To me, that makes perfect sense that you would do that. So here again, we have another environmental factor that never gets taken into account, right? What do you think about generational trauma? Yep, I absolutely think it's a thing. I have passed my traumas on to my children. I have done that by the ways in which I show up to the relationships with them. Painful for me to admit that. Painful, but absolutely true. The biggest pain I suffer with the work that I do in my life today is how much easier I find it to be there for people that aren't close to me. I can go into a school and help and support other children easier than I can my own. Incredibly difficult thing. The worst parts of me show up in my relationships that really matter to me. Incredibly difficult thing. But what you can take from that is that I am ultimately going to pass my traumas on to my children. And so what I say to that, by the way, is people say don't create a childhood, or no, people say create a childhood that your child won't need to heal from. And I say, don't put that pressure on yourself. Create a childhood that ultimately means that your children will know that they can come to you and maybe do some healing with you together. Now, that's less social media attractive, right? But I think it's more realistic. And I think in some ways it can be more comforting to people to understand, you know, this ain't easy. This ain't easy. And so let's all try and kind of work together to understand that. I hope that makes sense. Hey, I just want to say thanks for all the stuff you post. I find it's very relatable. Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Staying sober as well. Hi, once you have realised the enormity of what you have been through and experienced, how do you keep yourself from not repeatedly going back into a negative spiral and focus on your path now? So let me just reread the question. How do you keep yourself from not repeatedly going back into a negative spiral and focus on your path now? The answer to the question is I don't. I regularly go into negative spirals and find them really, really difficult. I have times, maybe not as regular as I used to, and maybe not as prolonged as I did, but I have times when I just feel like I'm not going to be able to survive my whole life like feeling this way. And then I come through them, and then I make sense of them, and then I move on to the next one. When you feel things really, really deeply, like somebody like me does, that's inevitable. And that's why I don't get too caught up in what you see online. You know, I'll never say, go by inner you, it'll change your life, you'll be healed, and you'll be setting boundaries and nobody will ever affect you anymore. Because I don't believe that happens. But like, if it's happened to other people, I don't want to talk for them. Maybe it's happened for them, but it's never happened for me. And I won't pretend that I believe it can happen for other people. I've got to go back now because it's skipped right down to the bottom. Hang on, bear with me. Right, I'm going to go back as far as this. Sorry if I've missed questions. How could I look after myself while looking after my father who suffers with alcohol addiction and has all my life, who is now reliant on my care to survive, probably selfishly? It's hard. That's hard. You should be your priority. You and your family and your well-being should be your priority, and then perhaps if there's any emotional capacity left after that, then you do what you can. It's hard. Make sure you've got support. NACOA, if you don't know about NACOA, NACOA, then you should go and find them. They can support you in the way that you deserve to be supported. All right, I'm going back a little bit. Okay, I can't go back that far. Sorry, there's so many questions. I'm just going to pick random ones out. Oh no, I've just done that one. What strategy works best for your anxiety? Breathwork. Is your breathwork course online or in London? My breathwork course is all online. It's not just breathwork, but that's a big part of it. Breathwork for me has been single-handedly the most important thing for me in terms of my anxiety. But I still get it. Yeah. So it's not gone. There's people out there that say that they've got rid of it. I don't know. I don't know if you can feel things as deeply as I can and get rid of it. Let me go down. I've tried to talk to friends and it causes them or makes them treat me differently. Yeah, see, that's true. People aren't ready. There's a lot of shame, blaming in mental health. There is. I agree. Trauma bonding, an interesting concept when we meet someone. When we meet somebody and fall in love in an instant because we trauma bond with them. It's very common, right? It's very common because it's going to make you feel very seen very, very quickly. Where are we going? Love your honesty. Oh, thank you. Aren't we always together with the ones we love? Aren't we always tougher with the ones we love? Interesting. I am harsher with the ones that I love, and it's very easy for me to say I'm harsher because I love my children and I don't want them to turn out like me. But I have never sat and thought, okay, I'm going to try and be harsher with my children to see if that works. Never. I only ever do it when I'm triggered into a certain situation. So, though I do think there is need and space for controlled boundaries and strict boundaries, which I'm not very good at, right? In fact, let me say this. The thing I think I struggle with the most as a parent is I'm always crisis avoiding, right? I'm always trying to avoid it going off, right? I'm always trying to avoid confrontation. And that means that I often don't parent my children fairly, right? The one that is going to cause the least amount of confrontation, for example, if there's a dispute between two of the children, may in that moment get treated better than me because I'm trying to avoid confrontation. That's all about my fear of confrontation, okay? And then I might be harsher with one because I'm triggered into a state because of what I'm experiencing. And again, look, this is all about me. And I can make reasons for that, and I can rationalize reasons for that will satisfy myself and most people around me. But if I dig deep enough, they're not ultimately true. And so I have to understand that. And it's horrible to do that. It's horrible for me to say that I might treat my children differently because I'm terrified of confrontation. But that's the reality. And unless I'm honest with myself about that, then I'll never work on it. What we do is we create these rational reasons why we do things so that we don't have to look at the truth. I think we do that on a societal level, by the way. And why do you think this worst part of us shows up to the ones that are closest to us? And again, that's why, yeah? Because that part of me becomes really, really strong, yeah? Anybody that's had a difficult childhood or a life with a difficult parent when they were younger will know how much pain it causes you when you come around from being a little bit triggered and you've just spoke to your children in the exact way that you're trying to heal from. And you think, I must be terrible. Who the hell am I? Yeah, thinking I'm on a healing journey, speaking or doing that, speaking to my kids in that way. But I think the truth is that it's true for all of us. We're all on our journey, right? And the kids are in there with it. And this is why community is so important, right? Because you're supposed to have loads of people around these kids to help them comprehend their experience. They're supposed to be able to have a nan or a neighbor or an aunt or an uncle or somebody else down part of the tribe who helps them comprehend why dad was not very nice yesterday when dad's not able to help them comprehend why dad wasn't very nice, yeah? But we lack that in society, and we need to find more ways to bring that to it. It used to be in schools, and then we stripped schools bare by taking away all of the funding. Good. A lot of pressure on parents. Healing together with your kids is a long thread. Thank you for naming the passing along trauma. This is honest and pure resonance. Thank you. Let's read some of the questions that are in here. How can we develop an inner parent that takes care of the inner child? Look, I don't want to just point towards inner you, but that is exactly what we do on inner you. The problem for a lot of people is I've said this before, they go straight to their inner child, and their inner child is petrified because their inner child is in hiding because of who we've become, right? Partly. So you need to do the work around who we've become first so that you can then go in and come home to yourself. You should use this for questions. Yes, it is better to use the questions section for the question. I've figured that out. I don't know what we have an hour into this. Are you familiar with blacked out traumatic events from childhood? How do you know to trust them? I'm not actually familiar with that term. So let me not try and answer that. And I'll go and have a look at it. I've got a feeling I know what it is, but I'm going to go and check it. What's the best way to speak to your inner child and help him or her or them heal and work through their shit to help adult you live in a better life? Look, again, you have to work on adult you first so that the inner child feels safe. Otherwise, it's just going to leave you feeling very unregulated and deregulated if you go in and try and speak to them. Oh my God, there's so many here. Love your work, thank you. Let's do one more, because it's very hot in here. How do I not feel guilty for choosing to protect myself from a negative relationship with my mother? I'm a nurse and care for people every day, so this is so difficult. How do you not feel guilty? Look, the first thing I always say when it comes to guilt is make sure that you're not feeling shame, right? Shame, most people have heard this, shame, the idea that there's something wrong with me. But you exist, let me tell you this. How do I not feel guilty for choosing to protect myself from a negative relationship with my mother? You shouldn't feel guilty because you exist in a society that feeds the toxic message to children and to everybody that you should love your mum and dad and your parents no matter what. You shouldn't feel guilty because that ideal is pushed on you from a young age. You shouldn't feel guilty because you exist in a society that seems completely incapable of supporting you and helping you understand and explore your experience free from their own experience. You shouldn't feel guilty because you didn't ask for this. And having a parent that deep down you desperately want to just love you the way that you are, continue to be toxic, is a road that's difficult to travel. And I trust and understand and recognize and know that the only reason you've done what you're doing is because there's no other choice. And so you shouldn't feel guilty. And when you do, have compassion for yourself. The guilt will come, ultimately it will come, and toxic people will tend to pull on that as well. So remember that too. But I hope you get some emotional freedom from it, the emotional freedom that you deserve. Whew. These come in very quickly. There is no childhood trauma for me as far as I'm aware. My dad's drinking became apparent in my late teens. Is there any signposts for this? Look, if you want me to answer the question honestly, then I will. You say, my dad's drinking became apparent in my late teens. He wouldn't have just started drinking. He wouldn't have lived a happy and fulfilled present life up until you were a teenager and then all of a sudden start drinking. There would have been it would have showed up some other way, if not in drinking, and if it was hidden drinking, then you would have known at some level that was happening. And I think in some ways that makes it even harder for you to kind of understand what your struggles are. Take my story with my dad. My dad was quite a violent, angry, chaotic alcoholic who ended up in prison when I was very young. So it's very easy for me to look at that and say, okay, I might be affected. I actually think most people, or there's a massive pool of people who struggle with a parent whose drinking might not have been so obvious, and so whatever internal struggle that they had was going on behind it, and it's harder to pick it up, and all of that gets swept under the carpet and everybody plays like everyone's all right. But as a child, you're intuitive and you're picking up on that stuff. And that's not to blame anybody's parents or to say that it's your parents' fault, right? They have their own stuff that they were going through in some cases, but you can see how that would have an impact. And you know, trauma sometimes in this case feels like too strong a word, but you can see how the wounding may have passed itself down. So I would say explore that. I'm good. I'm glad the thing about guilt helped you. What else we got here? What is the impact of reparenting your inner child? Look, what happens in the end is I think you'll be able to understand and have a relationship with all of the parts of yourself and know them better. Nakoa is in the building. Nakoa UK, by the way. For the people that have been talking about parents that drink too much, we are going to do a live. I will make sure that I share about when that's going to be. It will maybe be this week, but I don't even know if that's Piers in here on the account. But if it is, then we will we'll announce it properly. Let's do that. So yeah, the impacts of reparenting your inner child, you get to know all of the parts of yourself and you get to help that part of you feel safe. So you can go forth into the world and be every part of who you were supposed to be. To answer that quickly and in a nutshell. Why do we copy some of the behaviours of the parent which hurt us and we hate him for it? Sometimes I don't think it's copying. So we say it's like learned behaviour, and I think that's obviously part of it, right? But actually, I think it's more often that we're reacting to a similar wound, right? And I don't know the full answer to that, but I do think that that's a lot to do with it. And so our reaction is kind of similar, but also, like, what part of what makes us human is that we learn, right? Is our innate ability to learn. And so we have to remember that our brain is developing when we're young so rapidly and based on our experiences within our environment, right? So it makes sense that we would develop similar systems of dealing with life to what our parents did. Okay, I'm going to do this last question and then I'm going to close down. Somebody says, how do you deal with narcissistic parents? You deal with them the best way that you can. You deal with narcissistic parents in the only way that you can, that helps to put yourself first and your well-being first. If that means cutting them out, then you cut them out. All right? That's what I believe. I don't think you should love them just because they're your parents. I don't think you should let them continue to emotionally abuse you just because they're your parents. All right? I've talked about this in the past, but I'll talk about it very quickly again now. I heard the analogy of treating it like sitting near a fire, right? A fireplace, you know, like an in-house fire, yeah? That is your narcissistic parent. You sit as close as you can without getting burnt. If that fire is raging and you can't be anywhere near it, then you don't be anywhere near it, because you don't deserve to get burnt because of somebody else. If you can get a little bit close and be warm and not get burnt, then maybe you do that. Okay? So I think that's the best way for me to describe it. Somebody has just said, I'm still so angry at my parents. I understand that. And maybe that makes sense. And maybe your anger is justified. I don't need to say any more than that. I'm going to leave it there. This has gone, I don't even know how long this has gone on, but it's been really good. I've really enjoyed it. I will do more. Maybe I'll do another one next week. I'll let you know about the Nicole one that we're going to do. I'm sure Piers will confirm that with me. And then we'll do that one. That's going to be all about children of alcoholics, children affected by parents drinking, specific. So we'll do that. This will go on my grid, on my profile, so you can go back and watch it. And look, I always chop little bits of content out of it as well, so there'll be some of that for you. Thanks everybody for being in the space. Really appreciate it, particularly for people that have been answering people's questions that I might not have been able to answer in the comments. I love it. And take care, everyone. See you soon.